Hello, we're going to introduce you to the U.S. criminal courts and our book, American Criminal Courts, Legal Process and Social Context. This book has two main purposes. First is to explain the nuts and bolts of the criminal courts, the basic operations from pre-trial stages up through trial and appeals. The second goal of the book is to introduce and shed light on all of the variables that influence the courtroom actors, in particular the lawyers and the judges who operate within the court. What influences their decisions and their actions? Accompanying this book is a series of videos, and this is the first one. And each video will correspond with a chapter and introduce the chapter as well as an important and emerging topic related to the courts. This first video is going to introduce the three overarching issues in the study of courts. My name is Casey Welch. I'm an associate professor of criminology and sociology at Flagler College in St. Augustine, Florida. I've been teaching and studying criminology in courts for about 20 years, and this is my co-author and colleague, John Fuller.
I'm John Fuller. I'm a professor of criminology at the University of West Georgia in Carrollton, Georgia. I have been teaching and writing about the criminal justice system for over 30 years. The first of the overreaching issues that we want to talk about has to do with situating courts within the criminal justice system. Now, courts are just one component of the system, and they are dependent upon and influence other components of the system, mainly law enforcement and corrections. Law enforcement makes the arrest, sends the case to courts, courts process the case, and send them to the correctional agencies for incarceration, diversion, probation, or other types of dispositions. But the point we really want to make here is that everything that law enforcement, courts, and corrections do is bound by law. And so we have to understand how courts are the interpreter of the law for other components of the criminal justice system. Now, the second overarching concern has to do with the types of law that the courts must deal with. And there are two types. The first is the substantive law. Substantive law is the thou shall nots that we all must live by. We're not allowed to murder people. We're not allowed to break into people's homes. We're not allowed to embezzle money from banks. These laws are all written down in our legal statutes, and the courts must interpret how specific cases apply those specific laws. As important as the substantive law is, there's an equally important type of law that we call procedural law. Procedural law dictates how the criminal justice system can do their job. For instance, in law enforcement, suspects must be given their Miranda rights. In the correctional system, offenders must be treated with a certain level of dignity and humanity in terms of the types of cells they're in, the types of food they're given. There are rules and regulations that are overseen by the courts that dictate how various components of the criminal justice system do their job. And of course, this is particularly important for the courts themselves. Casey, what's the third overarching concern we want to talk about?
Thanks, John. The third one involves the idea that there are many variables that influence these lawyers and judges. The variables can be broken down into three categories. One is that there's actually steady principles that guide and constrain them. Some of these principles are 500 years old. The idea that we are innocent until proven guilty, the idea of reasonable doubt, that we have a right to a public trial, and a right to confront witnesses who are bearing testimony against us. These principles greatly constrain and guide the decision-making of the lawyers and the judges. But there's also, on the informal side, this internal ecology that influences the decision-making of the lawyers and judges. Things like, what is the prosecutor's budget? Do they have the capacity to hire investigators or interpreters or victim service advocates? Same thing with the defense attorneys. What's their budget? There's also what's often referred to as the local legal culture, and the courtroom work group will develop their own habits and rituals in each courthouse that are distinct from other courthouses. On the external side, there is what's called the external ecology. There are forces that are coming in, pressures and influences from outside of the courts, things like elections and the media, but also there's social movements, people, citizens, rising up.
Can you give me an example of that?
Absolutely. Well, there's a lot of them. One of them that kind of stands out in my head in fairly recent American history was that 1999 case in Tollia, Texas. And there were 38 people convicted of distribution of powder cocaine, all of it based on the testimony of one contradicting undercover police officer. No drugs were presented, no videotapes, no money. But they were all convicted by this one man's testimony. It was clearly a case of injustice, but the court system was doing nothing about it. Two local activists started an organization, got local media attention, then state media attention, then national media attention. Eventually, the NAACP sent in a couple lawyers from Washington, D.C., and they defended them on appeal and won the exoneration of all of those defendants because they were all innocent.
That reminds me of a case going on in Florida right now, the Trayvon Martin case, where this young African-American, unarmed 17-year-old was confronted by a neighborhood watch person named George Zimmerman. A scuffle ensued, and Zimmerman shot Trayvon Martin, claiming he was standing his ground under Florida law. Case went nowhere for a long time until the media got involved.
And the activists.
And raised the visibility to national and international level. We don't know how that case is going to be resolved as we do this filming, but it's an excellent example of some of these external factors that impact upon the court. And so, just in summary, what we're going to be concerned with in these videos is detailing exactly the legal processes that the courts must follow and the social context within which they work in terms of dealing with these three overarching concerns.
All right, thanks, John. And we'll see you all in the next video.